And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Weiner. Thank you, Patty, for inviting me back. We're going to talk a little bit about Florida, and we're going to talk about Florida being the most unlikely of places in the 1960s where culture changes. And that includes the Beatles meeting Cassius Clay. That includes man going to the moon from Florida. That includes Walt Disney falling in love with Central Florida. Also, Jackie Gleason moving to Florida, and Joe Namath and the New York Jets winning the Super Bowl in Florida and changing the Super Bowl in terms of importance in the United States. But before I get on, we know that everybody from the New York area has to make a pilgrimage to Florida, right? It's written. It's written. You have to be that way. Anyway, how did that start? Well, this guy, Henry Morrison Flagler, might have had something to do with it. You see, he was part of the Standard Oil Company, and he had his offices in Lower Manhattan near Bowling Green, right off of Wall Street. And he was working with John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil Company, and got sick and tired of the winters in New York and figured there's got to be a better way. I don't want to be cold in the winter. So he decides, well, I'm going to make a venture down to Florida. And he goes down to Florida in 1876, 1877. And he goes to Augusta, and he finds that he enjoys Augusta, Florida. He would not see this. This is Fort Lauderdale as the sun is going down, but of course you're facing east, not west. So there is no sunset over the beach in Fort Lauderdale. But he saw beaches and he saw palm trees, and he thought, hey, you know what? This is a good place. I'm going to start the American Riviera. Flagler was on the board of directors of Standard Oil, gave up his day-to-day involvement in the corporation to pursue his goal, build the American Riviera in Florida. And he starts doing that in the 1880s. He returns to St. Augustine in 1885 and starts the construction of the 540-room Ponce de Leon Hotel. And it is in St. Augustine that he decides, you know what? Let's start building a railroad and going south and south and south, because I hear the weather down by Palm Beach is a lot better than it is here in St. Augustine in November, December, January, February, and March. And there is St. Augustine. I was there in about 2003. The world's oldest wood schoolhouse in the United States is in St. Augustine, as you can see there. And there's my wife in front of the statue of Ponce de Leon. Because it was Ponce de Leon who really got to Florida a long time before Henry Flagler. And Florida was this magical land for people. Not sure why it was, but it was. And Ponce de Leon was absolutely convinced that the fountain of youth, which is what he was looking for, was located somewhere in Florida. And there's the Ponce de Leon statue in front of the municipal headquarters of St. Augustine, Florida. Flagler had the money. He had a lot of money, Standard Oil Company, and he decides, you know what, the next step in this, after building the hotel, is to buy the railroads that existed there. And they weren't really all that long, the railroads. They went from town to town, but eventually he would buy them all up, and it would be known as the Florida East Coast Railway. And the goal was simple. This is going to be the American Riviera. It's going to meet anything you could find in Europe. He was supposed to go down as far as West Palm Beach. It was about 200 miles. And that's where he was going to stop. West Palm Beach, the end of the railroad system. This is where he's going to set up shop. This is going to be the hub. But a funny thing happened on the way to West Palm Beach. Thought I was going to say a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. 1894, and in 1895, he's there, and he sees that there are severe freezes. It's cold. I mean, it's really cold. It's below 32 degrees, and Flagler is beginning to think, hey, wait a minute, this idea, two years in a row I'm down here. This idea may not work. I better figure out something else. But he started talking to locals. And the locals said, hey, listen, go down about 60, 70 miles. There were landowners down there named Julia Tuttle and William Breckel. And they run the trading post on the Miami River, and they own land down there. And supposedly it never snows down there. And supposedly it's always warm down there. Why don't you go down there and see what's going on? So he decides, okay, he meets with them, and he's going to extend that railroad the 60 miles down to the Miami River and what would become the Miami. He was supposed to stop here at the Breakers in Palm Beach. It was supposed to be the end of the trail. The Breakers, the world-class hotel in Palm Beach. But he builds the railroad. He keeps going and going and going. Now, he obviously didn't see this. This is Fort Lauderdale from a cruise ship. When you leave Fort Lauderdale, head down to the Caribbean. But it doesn't get really cold down in Fort Lauderdale. It's 47 degrees down there the other day, and I have some friends who live there who were complaining about just how cold it was down in South Florida. Flagler also encouraged local people start fruit farming, settle here, settle along the railroad lines. And he would also make sure that if people settled, he would build hospital, churches and schools. He would eventually go down to Key West. The Flagler Highway goes down to Key West. By 1896, Flagler's roadway, the Florida East Coast Railway, reached Biscayne Beach, which is Miami today. Flagler dredged the channel, built streets, instituted the first water and power systems as he went down. And then he talked to Tuttle and the others and said, listen, we got to name this thing something. So why don't we use the old Indian name, Miami, which is what Ed Sullivan called it when the Beatles were on his show in 1964, and they did a show from Miami. And this is what he thought people wanted to go see: the beaches, the seagulls, and the water, the warm water of the Atlantic Ocean. Miami and the surrounding areas would grow because of Flagler. It became a tourist destination, particularly for people from the New York area. And it was a destination for those seeking to flee colder winter climates, again, from the New York area. The area would get a major boost when the Jackie Gleason show moved from New York to Miami. That should be 1964, not 1966. Jackie Gleason, how sweet it is. Come on down. That was Jim Dooley, actually. Remember Jim Dooley did the commercials? Come on down. The weather's fine. Jim Dooley. The Orange Bowl started in Miami. Brought some attention to Miami with the football game, college football game every year starting in 1935. And there's the Everglades, and that was my son when he was a wee lad, 1994 in the Everglades, which was not chewed up for development. It is still there. Worlds collide on February 18th, 1964. Now, when I'm with a crowd live, I do the, where were you on February 18th, 1964? Or do you remember February 18th, 1964 in any way, shape, or form? You probably don't, and there's really no reason for you to do so. But February 18th, 1964 was 9 days after the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan. In fact, the Beatles had two shows on Ed Sullivan on February the 9th and February the 16th, and they threw in a concert in Washington as well during their first stay in the United States. But worlds would collide on February 18th, 1964, as this guy told me. Some of you probably know who this guy is. His name is Robert Lipsyte, Bob Lipsyte, a guy I've known for over 35 years. He wrote for the New York Times. He had a show on PBS, Channel 13. If you were in the New York area, it was Channel 13. And we're acquaintances. In fact, he was one of the people who suggested you should go into speaking before groups, which is what he does, because you have the stories and you can talk. And I said, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. He was good friends with Howard Cosell. I was friends with Howard Cosell. Howard's grandson, Justin, lives in Stanford. He's a charter school principal, not too far from where you are right now. But anyway, Lipsyte's with the New York Times, and he's covering spring training, the Yankees spring training, and he gets a call from his editor at the New York Times, and he says, Bob, there's something going on down in Angelo Dundee's gym down in Miami Beach, the Fifth Street gym. The Beatles, they're meeting with Cassius Clay. So why don't you go down there and cover it for us? Well, Bob does, and he goes down there, and he's in a room. They put him in a holding room, and they said, just stay here. We'll get you when everything is ready to go. Then he's joined by 4 other people in that room: John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. And they are locked together for a half hour. Bob told me that Paul, George, and Ringo were pretty good guys. They weren't complaining. After all, this was all new to them, and they weren't used to being boxed up quite yet. That would be coming later on. So the 4 of them are in the room. And John Lennon is complaining. A, he doesn't want to be in the room waiting around. And B, he doesn't want to meet Cassius Clay, because Cassius Clay is a loser. And this is all in Bob's book, Accidental Sports Writer, by Bob Lipsyte, if you want to look it up or read all about it. It's all in the book. And so Bob is locked in this room with the 4 Beatles, and John Lennon is complaining. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. Why are we here? I don't associate with losers. Cassius Clay is a loser. Sonny Liston is going to beat him. Sonny Liston is the baddest guy around, heavyweight champion of the world. I associate with people like Sonny Liston. I never associate with losers. And this guy Clay is a loser. And Bob is listening to this for about a half hour. Finally, they open the door. The Beatles walk in. Lipsyte walks in with the rest of the media. The cameras are all there in terms of newspapers at that time, the magazines, which was a big deal. The TV cameras there as well. And there was Sonny Liston, who was John Lennon's hero. But immediately, these 4 guys and that guy on the right, Cassius Clay, get into showbiz. They're into showbiz, and they're looking to take pictures, and both Clay and the Beatles say, sure, we're here for pictures. Now, Cassius Clay, when he saw the 4 Beatles, he turned to one of his associates. I'm not sure if it was Drew Bundini Brown, who I knew, or Angelo Dundee, who you will see in a couple minutes in one of the pictures with my son. I don't know who he turned to, but he said to whoever was around him, who are those 4 little sissies? And yet he comes out there and it's showbiz. It's electric. Ringo jumps on his back, and Cassius Clay takes him around for a ride. And this is, as Lipsyte said, the clash of cultures. But Lipsyte also said one other thing. He said, February 18th, 1964, what if something went wrong? What if the Beatles, they get done with Ed Sullivan and just flop? What if Sonny Liston does beat Cassius Clay? What happens to 2 of the iconic names, the Beatles, Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali, in the 1960s, if they both fail? You would never hear from them again. One-hit wonders as opposed to did I just get a question here? I'm not sure if I got a question or not. Anyway, one-hit wonders to a guy knocked out by Sonny Liston. But of course, that didn't happen. The Beatles would go on. They would make Hard Day's Night. They would make all these albums. They would appear crisscrossing the United States. They'd have 55,000 people that saw them at Shea Stadium in 1964. And Muhammad Ali would become the heavyweight champion of the world and defend it until 1967, when he's called to the draft board in Houston and refuses to take the oath of the military and is stripped of his boxing title along with his license to box and becomes an anti-war protester, although he never said he was an anti-war protester. I was at the 92nd Street gym a couple of years, 92nd Street Y, I'm sorry, a couple of years ago, and I'm giving this talk there. And a woman said she was in one of the anti-war protests. And she said that her big thrill of the anti-war protest was looking about 6 feet to her right. There was Muhammad Ali in the middle of the war protest. And of course, Ali was a bad guy too, because he went from Cassius Clay, joined the black Muslims, becoming Muhammad Ali. And he became a very scary guy as well. And the Beatles to the establishment, also very scary. And if you look back 55 years later at, here's just the boxer meeting a singing group. And yet they become symbols of the 1960s. And that was 1985 when I'm shaking hands with Muhammad. Unfortunately, at that point, he couldn't speak that well. The Parkinson's had kicked in, but there was me and Ali, 1985. And a couple of years before I'm interviewing Ali, you can see I'm about ready to ask the question of Ali, who is listening to my question, and that's Bob Trainer to Ali's left. Dundee had the gym where Cassius Clay trained for his fight with Sonny Liston in 1964. It was the 5th Street gym. And I knew Angie, and I did some interviews with him, and particularly in the mid-1990s. I wanted to know all about Cassius Clay, meeting the Beatles, and everything else that went on in the early 1960s. That was the day in 1994 when my son was there, and he was all of 8 years old as he got into the gym with old Angelo Dundee. And that is the 5th Street gym was long gone by that point. It was somewhere else. Meanwhile, what about Sonny Liston? Well, he fought Ali at 65. He lost, and eventually he would die of a heroin overdose. But John Lennon never gave up on Sonny Liston. You probably remember, some of you, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which the album came out in June of 1967. And if you take a close look at the album cover to the left, to the Mannequin Beatles, which is to the right of the 1967 Beatles, the Fab Four Beatles, and you look to George Harrison's right, there is Sonny Liston. Now, the cover of this album, the four Beatles were asked to name your heroes. We will put them on the album cover. Well, Ringo Starr declined, but John, Paul, and George put up their heroes. One of their heroes, Fred Astaire in the back there. Mae West didn't want to be on the album cover, but Sonny Liston is there. Sonny Liston is there. John Lennon never gave up on Sonny Liston, and there is the cutout that eventually would make the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club album cover. Sonny did see them once somewhere and wasn't too impressed because you couldn't hear them. And Muhammad Ali never saw them. Lennon never gave up on Muhammad Ali either, apparently. Because in 1972, he started to write a song called I'm the Greatest. And he figured out, I really can't do a song called I'm the Greatest and me singing it. Ali, well, I'm the greatest of all time. Greatest of all time, I'm the greatest. In fact, Muhammad Ali trademarked the four letters, G-O-A-T, GOAT, greatest of all time, trademarked for business purposes. He gets back into fighting in 1970. This is the 1977 Jimmy Carter inaugural. But getting back to Lennon, so he writes the song in 1972, I'm the Greatest. He can't sing it, but Ringo can, and he gives it to Ringo. And they recorded in LA, and George Harrison is also on the song. Could be considered the last real recording between John, George, and Ringo of the Beatles, although the Beatles had split up by that point. It went on to the Ringo album, I'm the Greatest, with Muhammad Ali in mind. And Paul McCartney when he was touring, did a riff of one of Ali's poems talking about the Beatles were never going to get back together. But so Ali would have an impact on the Beatles. And again, the Jimmy Carter inaugural on January 20th, 1977. I don't know what they're talking about, but either Yoko is ordering or getting a phone number or giving her phone number to Muhammad Ali. Well, in 1963, Walt Disney was looking for a place to open another Disneyland. That's the governor of Florida at the time in 1965, Hayden Burns, and there is Walt, and there is Roy Disney, and he's looking for an East Coast version of Disneyland. In 1959, Walt Disney Productions wanted a second resort. They took a marketing survey and they found that only 5% of the visitors came from east of the Mississippi, and 75% of the United States population in 1959 lived east of the Mississippi. So Walt began to look and look and look. And in November 1963, he's in a helicopter and he's going over Central Florida near Orlando. And he's taking a look and he says, hey, wait a minute. You got Interstate 4, I-4, which goes from Tampa out to Cocoa Beach. You got I-4, and you got the Florida Turnpike, which is coming up from the Miami area and goes into near the Panhandle. We could get land nearby, and we could do stuff here. And we also got an Air Force base to the east. Also, they had Cape Canaveral to the east, and he had his place. All it required him to do was to cut the deal eventually with the Florida people, and Disney World would be born. It would open in 1971 and would make Orlando one of the international destinations, top international destinations in the world. That is my daughter back in 1986, when January 1986, when we were at Epcot. Walt Disney World, part of it comes from the New York World's Fair. Disney was given free rein at the New York World's Fair to figure out what he wanted for his new amusement park. And what came out of it was something my daughter hated at the time. It's a small world, that ride. That ride was at the New York World's Fair. It was packed up, sent out to Anaheim, Disneyland there, and it was replicated for Disney World. The other thing that he had, he went to the Illinois Pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair, where they had the Speaking Abe Lincoln. He loved that, and that would turn into the Hall of Presidents. So those were the two things that he took out of the New York World's Fair back in 64, 65. The construction on Disney World started in 1967. It would open on October 1st, 1971. Check out the prices. These are great. Check out the prices. $3.50 for adults, $2.50 for juniors, those are the ones under 18, and $1 for children under 12. Today, it costs $1 in gas just to pass it. You have to take out a mortgage if you want to go to Disney World the way they are the way they scale their tickets now. They want you to stay there for 5 days, see all the theme parks, and stay at their hotel and never leave the property while you're there. The legacy of that, Orlando and Central Florida became an international destination, and the Orlando airport boomed. It expanded, 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 and Central Florida now gets as many visitors or more visitors, depending on the year, as Las Vegas and New York. We choose to go to the moon. That was a speech given by John F. Kennedy, May 25th, 1961. And where do you go to the moon from? Well, you leave from Florida. Warner, that's where we're going. Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, that's the moon. And we're going to go to the moon using that thing to my right, the Saturn IV rocket. Well, it became the Saturn V rocket. And they had to shoot it off from somewhere. And the somewhere was Cape Canaveral. NASA the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which was created during the Eisenhower administration. Its first manned space flight, although they had some space flights coming out of Cape Canaveral, prior to Alan Shepard on May 5th, 1961. The first manned space flight was from Cape Canaveral in Florida. And it was handled by U.S. Air Force crews. It was a suborbital flight, which meant it just went up and came down, as opposed to Yuri Gagarin, who a few weeks earlier actually circled the Earth in a Soviet spacecraft. It was done by Alan Shepard, and there are a few things about this flight that you might think is funny. One, Alan Shepard wanted to stop going into space because he wanted to go to the bathroom. And I said, no, you can't. He said, I gotta go. And the countdown kept going and going and going. And finally, Alan couldn't hold it in. So he wet his suit, which was probably something that they prepared for anyway. And the other thing, the flight was delayed a couple of times. And Alan Shepard said, this is a government project, right? Yeah. He said, so I'm sitting on a whole bunch of low bidders who built this thing. Of course, in the government, you have to take the lowest bid. By law, you take the lowest bid, and Shepard pointed that out. There'd be another suborbital flight on July 21st of that year, and John Glenn would go up on February 20th, 1962 in the Mercury spacecraft, and there would be 3 more orbital flights through May of 1963. But that was the first step going to the moon, and that would come from Florida. And then came the Gemini program, and this is cheating. I'm going to tell you this is cheating because this is not Florida. This is right outside of the Hall of Science in Flushing Meadow. And that mock-up has been there since the 1960s. That's the Gemini spacecraft. And they painted it and they made it look good, as opposed to the New York State Pavilion, which looks horrible, although they're putting money into it now. Maybe they'll revitalize it. But that was the Gemini spacecraft, 2 men in there to see how to operate in space, rendezvous with another craft in space, longer space missions, and that was Gemini. Mercury, the longest mission was Gordon Cooper in 1963, and that was 1 day. The first manned flight of Gemini, Gemini 3, took place March 23rd, 1965. There would be more Gemini flights, 7 unmanned launches of the Gina target vehicle, and it was all critical, the docking maneuvers and rendezvous, all critical for the Apollo program designed to land man on the moon. The Apollo program, the goal of landing man on the moon required the development of Saturn rockets. The large Saturn V rocket was necessary to take men to the moon and required a larger launch vehicle or facility. And the Cape Canaveral facility was a bit too small. So a little bit west and north of Cape Canaveral, there was Merritt Island, and that is where the Apollo missions blasted off at Cape Kennedy on Merritt Island. March of 1969, it's time to go to the moon, because Kennedy said back in May 25th, 1961, we choose to go to the moon, and then he made a promise. Man wouldn't land on the moon by the end of the decade. That could have been 1970, because technically the 1960s go from 1961 to the end of 1970. If you're being technical about it. Apollo 9, that was the 3rd crew mission of the Apollo program, and the first of paired with the lunar module, which was made by Grumman and Beth Page on Long Island. James McDivitt, David Scott, Rusty Schweikert spent 10 days in space, and they did a whole bunch of things that were critical to landing on the moon, including firing the lunar module engines, using backpack life support systems, navigational system, and docking maneuvers. Passes with flying colors. And then we get to Apollo 10. Stafford, Young, and Sorlin. Thomas Stafford, one of the 2 astronauts I've met and interviewed. The other one was Buzz Aldrin. Buzz was aptly named. And Apollo 10 would go within, rather the lunar module would go within 8 miles of landing on the moon, and it was the dress rehearsal for landing on the moon to make sure everything works. Leaving the the command module on its own, the lunar module, getting down to about 8 miles, firing up the engine and docking so they could get back. That all passes. A little dress rehearsal. May 18th, 1969, and just short of landing on the moon. And that brings us up to Apollo 11, which was July 16th, 1969. That's my friend Dick Hull. Dick Hull lives near Cape Canaveral now in an assisted living home, senior residence. He's got some health issues after all, you know. And basically he told me, he gave me, because I was doing a space race, Cold War landing on the moon talk 2 years ago to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing on the moon. So he gave me a lot of stories. One, he told me it was a miracle that man actually got on the moon. And if you want that talk, I'll give you that talk at some point, because I got another story about Dick. Now, I don't know how many of you actually watched the lunar landing on July 20th, 1969, and watched Neil Armstrong come out of the spacecraft. Dick was working the mission. He was in Australia, and he was monitoring the video. He was a video guy, and he was taking in the video from the moon. And he's got himself all set up, and he's waiting, he's waiting and waiting and waiting for the signal to come down from the moon. It comes down from the moon about 25 seconds prior to the world seeing it. And this is what he saw. Neil Armstrong coming down, or he didn't actually see, he just saw that it was upside down. Neil Armstrong hadn't come out yet. And there's panic. What are we supposed to do? Well, Dick decides, well, I could do something. There's a mirror over there. I'll take the mirror and I'll put the mirror underneath the video, and we'll just flip it and nobody will know the difference. And Dick's boss said, if you do that, you'll get fired. And Dick's response was, well, then you'll be the laughing stock of the world. And time is ticking down. So Dick has to think real quick. He said, wait a minute, we're using a new system here. And he told me about the whole system. I still have no idea. It's this technical jargon that he gave me. He was still speaking space talk to me. And finally, I'll boil it down to you. Hey, I wonder if they flipped the switch on this thing, because this is a new thing. I don't think we really have tested it out. Sure enough, Dick flips the switch, and you get the right side up astronaut. And this, obviously, you didn't see this because this is a colored picture taken on the moon. But my point is, he straightened out the picture, and we spent billions and billions and billions of dollars to take that picture to walk on the moon, only to see it become, I want my MTV, in 1981. They doctored up the picture, put the MTV logo on there, and the astronaut is there. I want my MTV. Billions of dollars for that, and that became that. So man landed on the moon, and that was from Florida. The Apollo program would continue through 1972. 5 more missions would be successful. Apollo 13 never made it to the moon because of an onboard explosion. Well, it was a great movie, right? Starring Tom Hanks as Jim Lovell. I have a friend, or I had met a guy who was friends of Jim Lovell, and they did the Apollo 13 movie, and Lovell went on the tour with Ronnie Howard, with Ronnie Howard, because Opie did, Ron Howard, Opie from Andy Griffith, was the director of the movie. And the guy I know said, Jim came back, he said, yeah, you figure they'd ask me about the mission and all that other stuff. Said, no. The questions were, is Tom Hanks really a nice guy? And Lovell said he is. So there you go. Jim Lovell, who was on Apollo 13, said that Tom Hanks, who played them in the movie, was a nice guy. Congress cut the funding for Apollo 18, 19, and 20. That was in 1970. The last lunar landing, December 11th, 1972. And if you're playing Trivial Pursuit, the last man to walk on the moon was Eugene Cernan. So Cernan, C-E-R-N-A-N. So if you want to win money, betting or you're doing Trivial Pursuit or any other trivia contest, just remember the name Cernan. He was the last guy to walk on the moon. And there is the Apollo 11 spacecraft. That is at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. They've cleaned it up. That's an old picture. They've cleaned that up since then. The last public appearance of that capsule was March 16th through September 2nd, 2019 at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. It was supposed to be out there, but we got COVID-19. And, you know, they weren't the first guys on the moon, right? It was Alice Cramden. One of these days, Alice, one of these days, bang, zoom to the moon, Ralph Cramden. But there was a cartoon a couple of days after they landed on the moon and the two astronauts are walking around. They said, oh, we're not the first? So Alice Cramden was there. She was the first. Speaking of that, Jackie Gleason. How many of you watched the Jackie Gleason show, whether it was Cavalcade of the Stars on Dumont or the Jackie Gleason show on CBS? Jackie Gleason got tired of the weather in New York during the winter and decided he was going to move. And he had this, he rented a train. They had this big party going from New York because people used to take the train between New York and Miami Beach or Miami. And he moved his show to the Miami Beach Auditorium on Washington Avenue. Johnny Olson would open up the show every week from the fun and sun capital of the world, Miami Beach. It's the Jackie Gleason Show. And Gleason closed by shouting, Miami Beach audiences are the greatest in the world. Except the Miami Beach audience was made up mostly of people from the New York area who went to see the Jackie Gleason Show. Anyway, Gleason gave 6 years worth of publicity to Miami and Miami Beach that they could not buy, that Jim Dooley could not convince people to come down. Come on down, the weather is fine with his commercials. It was Gleason who told people, come on down. Gleason gave them 6 years of high visibility showbiz until the show ended in 1970. I always ask at this point, do you want a Jackie Gleason story? And even if you don't want it, you're going to get it. That's my friend, the late Shelley Salzman, passed away. I can't believe he passed away 2 years ago. Shelley used to call me. Hey, just checking in. Everything okay? Sure, good, bye. Shelley promoted the Battle of the Sexes between Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King in 1973, and I do that 1973 talk. I interviewed Billie Jean King about it, and Shelley, of course, my friend. If you remember the Billie Jean King, if you watch that thing, at network TV extravaganza, Billie Jean King came in like Cleopatra with 4 athletes from Rice University, no shirts on. That was Shelley's idea. He was also beaten up by Evel Knievel. But for this particular story, and that was Los Angeles in 2015. For this particular story, Shelley was promoting golf. And he was promoting the Andy Williams Open. In fact, in my 1968 talk, I have a story about Andy Williams, the RFK assassination, and Shelley. And so he's got Andy Williams, and he's got Glenn Campbell, and Sammy Davis Jr. up in Hartford, and Jackie in Miami. And the golf tour at that point wanted stars connected to a golf tournament, thinking that it would get more interest in golf. You had Bob Hope having his thing in Palms Desert. You had the Bing Crosby Clambake, some Gleason's in Miami. And Shelley's telling me the story. He says he meets with Gleason, and they're doing some publicity, whatever they're doing publicity. And Shelley is looking at Jackie. Jackie's wearing a suit, and he's got a vest on. And Shelley looks at the vest. He says, yeah. And he's just looking. And Jackie said, oh, you like my vest? He said, yeah. He says, you can have it. He said, well, it won't fit me. He said, don't worry about it. You can have it. Just get in the car. So they go in the car, and they go to this warehouse somewhere near Miami Beach. And Jackie opens up the warehouse, and they walk in. And he takes Shelley to a compartment in the warehouse, puts the key in, and on the door, it says, I wish. And Shelley begins to think about I wish. Jackie opens the door up, puts the lights on, and you thought you were in Sims. He had men's clothes everywhere, from size 32 to size XXXX large, and they were all the same. His vest was there in size 32, 34, 36. And he looks at Shelley, he says, what do you take, 42, 44? And Shelley says, yeah, 42, 44. And they walk over to an area filled with vests. And he looks, he says, take that one. He put it on. He puts it on. He says, it's yours, keep it. And Shelley said, well, thanks. Like, how can I repay it? Don't worry about it, keep it. He says, oh, by the way, the I wish there, I wish. What's I wish? I wish I could fit into these clothes. That was the I wish. He couldn't fit into these smaller clothes. Gleason, so he hosted the golf tournament, and he would introduce Larry King to the world by being a guest on Larry King's WIOD show in South Florida, in Miami. Larry King went from Brooklyn down to Miami, trying to make it in the world as a WIOD Miami talk show host. And there's Joe Namath. That's me to the right when I had hair. It was a big lawn sack. That was the Marantz tape recorders. And Bruce Morton to my left, who the other day I spoke to because he came to one of my talks, my football talk. And Joe Namath in the middle there. And behind Joe is Weeb Ewbank, who arguably won the two biggest games in National Football League history. Joe Namath makes the Super Bowl. I don't know if you are going to be able to have a Super Bowl party this year or not. I know a lot of Atrias in the past have had Super Bowl parties, whether you're a football fan or not, because it's a weekend of parties. Joe Namath is the guy who created the Super Bowl as a big event. The parties would come 4 years later in Long Beach on the Queen Mary docked cruise ship, which is still a hotel to this day. I was on the Queen Mary a few years ago. And Joe created the Super Bowl, and he did it by January 6th. He walks into a bar. And he's got Lou Michaels from the Baltimore Colts that he spots, walks out, comes back in with Jim Hudson, his New York Jets teammate. He walks over to Lou Michaels, whose brother, Walt Michaels, is the defensive coordinator in the New York Jets, and they look alike, really look alike. And he says, I'm Joe Namath, and I'm going to kick your butt. And there's some words back and forth, and Lou Michaels said that he was really surprised that Joe Namath didn't have any class. He said the other thing is, he said Joe Namath walks into this bar in Fort Lauderdale, but Lou says Miami. He says he's wearing a fur coat. He's wearing a fur coat. Can you imagine? He is wearing a fur coat in Miami on January 6th. And then the next day he tells the world, I guarantee you that we're going to win the Super Bowl. And I'm just looking at that picture. I still have that shirt. That's 1988. I still wear that shirt. And I was wearing a tie that day. I don't know why. I was wearing a tie, shirt and tie. Anyway, so Joe said, we're going to win. The Jets win. And the Super Bowl becomes an unofficial holiday in the United States. It takes a few years, but would become an unofficial holiday. The Super Bowl name, that's the first time the Super Bowl name is used, and it becomes the official name of the game. And Joe gives a news conference sitting on the Chase Lounge in Fort Lauderdale, and there are all these New York women around him. Look, it's Joe. Let's ask if it's Joe. Oh, the girls back home in the Bronx, they'll never believe it. They'll never believe it, but we met Joe. We met Joe. And they had to believe it because it was a picture that went right around the United States the next day of these two women talking to Joe, and Joe also talking to the assorted media in a lounge chair with a towel behind him, looking like a tourist. He was there to play a football game, but looking like a tourist and talking to this. That would never happen today. By the way, this Super Bowl, the halftime show was the Florida A&M marching band. A trumpet player played the national anthem. There was no pomp and circumstances. It was just a football game at that point. What people didn't know on January 12th, 1969 at noon, well, at noon you could still go down to the Orange Bowl. The game started at 4 o'clock and get tickets. They did not realize that the football industry, the sports industry, and culture was about to change before their eyes between 4 o'clock that Sunday afternoon and 7 o'clock that Sunday night. The world changed. The world totally changed in terms of football and culture. We now have this holiday in February called the Super Bowl. And there is me wearing a tie again in 1986 with Pete Rozelle, who was the commissioner of the National Football League. This was the United States Football League, National Football League antitrust trial in New York in 1986. And Pete and I must have said something to each other, but Pete Rozelle said, as an NFL guy, losing to an AFL team, he said, I hated it at the time, but it was the best thing that ever happened to us. It mushroomed interest in football. And there is my wife scoring a touchdown underneath the goalposts at the Orange Bowl, where Joe Namath won the game. Oh, that's my old buddy, the late Yogi Berra. It's 2006, April of 2006. And I spoke at his museum quite a bit. And afterwards, he would always pat me on the rear end and say, good job, kid. Good job, kid. Baseball spring training has taken place in Florida for more than a century. Eventually, the spring training would lead people to come down to watch spring training, and some of those people would eventually relocate in retirement to Florida because of spring training. Spring training in Florida started in 1888, roughly at the same time that Flagler was playing around from Augustine South, and Augustine's not very far from Jacksonville, with the Washington team there. That's the old Miami Stadium, and that's the old me in 1982 in front of the stadium, which was the spring training home of the Baltimore Orioles in 1982. In 1903, Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics baseball team went to Jacksonville for spring training. They had a problem there. They had a pitcher named Rube Wardell, and he was jilted by a lover, supposedly. And he was very upset. He was depressed, and he decided, you know, having a wrestling match with an alligator may just end it all for me. He won. The alligator lost. He continued his career. Florida just didn't work out after that alligator Rube Waddell experience. But spring training came back 10 years later. The Chicago Cubs went to Tampa, which was a developed city in Florida, really the only one at that point. And the Cleveland Indians in Pensacola. 1 year later, two teams moved in. Spring training would start with 4 teams there, and that's the start of the Grapefruit League, which continues through today. Music was a big deal. Eric Clapton recorded an album in Miami, as did the Bee Gees in the 1970s, and also the Hispanic market with Gloria Estefan became a huge deal. This guy you probably don't know. His name is Don Francisco, but his real name is Mario Krutzenberg, and he started this kind of let's make a deal amateur hour wrapped all into one show in 1962 in South America. But he would come up to the Miami area to tape the shows at the end of the run. About 10 years ago. He was on forever. It was a long running show. Mario Krutzenberg, known as Don Francisco. Miami became the center of Spanish-speaking TV in the United States, along with music. Some of the companies, past and present, that used Miami as headquarters for Spanish TV included Telemundo, Telefichera, the Galavision, Mega TV, Univision Communications Inc., Universal Music, Latin Entertainment, RCTV International, and Sunbeam TV. And we also had the disco craze that may have started elsewhere, but accelerated in Florida, as you might remember, with Casey and the Sunshine Band from Hialeah, Florida. They were huge. And it was just dance music, just ritual dance music. There was nothing deep about it. Not much when you think of it. Shake your booty. There's not much to think about with those lyrics. In the 1980s, television, American television, sort of returned to Miami with Miami Vice. The Miami Heat basketball team uses the same color scheme today on their basketball court as this show did in the mid-1980s. There is Gloria Estefan in the Miami Sound Machine. They were huge, still are, I suppose, in many ways. And there's Dwayne Wade a couple of years ago with the Miami Heat and their uniforms looking like Miami Vice. And some of those songs that you might remember from Harry Casey and the Sunshine Band, Get Down Tonight, That's the Way I Like It, Shake Your Booty, I'm Your Boogeyman. Like I said, nothing real deep there, nothing that you have to think about. There's no Peter, Paul, and Mary song there. There's no Strawberry Fields song there. There's no Bob Dylan. It's just straight dance music. So cultures do change in Florida, particularly in the 1960s. And space, men go to the moon. The Beatles meet Cassius Clay. Walt Disney opens Disney World. And Joe Namath changes the football world and the culture in the United States by winning a football game. And for that reason, he is in the National Football or the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Thank you, Patty, for inviting me. Do we have anybody want to say anything? I'll open it up for everybody to talk. Anybody have anything to say? Any comments, any questions?
I think everybody's still muted.
You're not?
I know, I just unmuted myself.
Yeah, everybody could unmute themselves.
I'm not sure they know that.
Yeah, anybody have anything to say?
Well, I certainly enjoyed your talk very much.
Thank you.
Yes, very much.
Thank you. Who is that who said that?
Fran Ventura. Yes, I enjoyed it very much, Evan. It brought back a lot of memories because I spent a lot of time in Miami when I was younger. My aunt and uncle owned a restaurant on Miami Beach.
Oh yeah, what restaurant?
It was called Antoinette's, originally from New Rochelle, New York.
Antoinette's is still around, or the name's still around here.
Could be. It could very well be.
So you were down there near Junior's and the Fountain Blue and all that?
That's right. That's right. So it brought back a lot of wonderful memories. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
And on the other end of Collins Avenue was Arthur Gottfried's
yes.
Hotel.
That's right. That's right. So I spent a lot of time there.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Very much.
Anybody else?
Again, most of them are muted.
Yeah. Well, they could actually go in the box, I think, and if they have any questions, type it in. If they want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Patty. I don't know if Patty's around. And say hello to Becky for me. I hear something in the background.
That's my clock.
Oh, okay.
That's my grandfather clock.
And it's telling us that it's 3 o'clock.
It's 3 o'clock.
It's 3 o'clock.
Yeah, and all is well.
All is well. Okay, well, I want to thank you and thank Patty for inviting me. We'll be back in February, right before the Super Bowl. And don't get scared off by the Super Bowl talk, because even though I'm talking about the Super Bowl, that talk is about how the Super Bowl came out of the Jim Crow era and a boycott of a football game in New Orleans. And I get into the culture of the Super Bowl and the name of the story, which is more fleshed out. And then I talk about the commercials and the food and the political importance of the Super Bowl in Arizona and the Janet Jackson. Mm-hmm. So it's not about the game. It's not about the game at all. It's about how it became a major player in the American culture. And it comes out of the civil rights movement in 1964. And it was done by these guys over a 36-hour period, all on their own. 22 African Americans who basically, they get some credit in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but these are the guys who basically kind of forced some people's hands, and we got the Super Bowl out of it. So I hope, so don't let that scare you off. Oh, it's a Super Bowl. Because women say, I don't want to hear about the Super Bowl, but it's more than just that. So and you know, anybody can talk about games in the Super Bowl, but how it became an American holiday, that's an interesting story. So anyway, stay safe. Hopefully you get your vaccines next time I talk to you.
Hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah, in fact, I'm willing to make a deal. I'll come live if you could get me on that list to get the vaccine. So hopefully you get it. Hopefully some point we all return to normal, and hopefully I'll be able to walk in there and actually interact with you and have you converse with me as we're talking. So anyway, thank you so much. And tell Patty I thank her for inviting me. And we'll see you next month.
Great, thanks a lot.
Have a great week.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Are you going to exit? Will you exit us out?
Yes, doing it
Okay.
right now.